He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello everyone, welcome to the next video of the Masters of Evil Marathon, which will keep on rolling. And today for you, we're going to be talking about the Mandarin. Yes, the Mandarin is considered in the Marvel Comics continuity to be the arch nemesis of Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. Despite the fact that the Mandarin has yet to appear in any of the live action Iron Man movies, but one can still hope. Hopefully we will see him in the third movie. If Shane Black actually does a little bit of research, that is. But I digress. First, we'll get into the Mandarin's origins. The Mandarin, we never really figure out what his real name is, although we assume that part of his name is Khan, and he's believed to have been descended from the great ruler Genghis Khan, and he's born into a very wealthy Chinese family. However, both of his parents died when he was a young kid, so he ended up being raised by a very angry and hateful aunt who despised the world, and she pretty much raised the Mandarin as a young kid to do the same thing. And the Mandarin's aunt basically convinced the young man that he's destined for great things, and that he's destined to rule the world, and everybody else is basically minuscule and diminutive before him and his great intelligence. And this sort of boosted the Mandarin's ego to immeasurable heights, so much so that he pretty much spent his entire fortune and wealth both on training himself both in science and as well as martial arts and hand-to-hand combat, kind of like Batman a little bit. However, unlike Batman, the Mandarin he went completely bankrupt from spending all this money, and he ended up homeless because he had no more wealth to pay his bills with. So, as living as a hobo in China, he ventures into China's Forbidden Valley of Spirits, and there he finds a crashed alien spaceship that's been laying dormant there for thousands of years. Inside the spaceship, he sees the wrecked bodies of several reptilian aliens from the planet known as Maklu 4. And inside he finds these 10 magical rings, which he later uses to condense all of the greatest weapons and technology available aboard the ship. So the Mandarin spends several years adapting and learning the scientific techniques of the Makluans to basically incorporate all the deadliest Makluan weapons into these 10 rings, which he learned to master and harness for himself. When the Mandarin finally learned how to master and manipulate this alien technology for his own gain, he pretty much set to take revenge on the Chinese government that stripped him of his power in the first place, and thus he began his own career as a supervillain. In his first attempts to basically get revenge on the Chinese government. This sort of caught him in. These were basically the basis for his first few encounters with Iron Man. On several occasions, the Mandarin would capture either Iron Man or his alter ego, Tony Stark. And at some point, the Mandarin actually manages to remove Iron Man's helmet. However, Tony Stark, being the smart son of a bitch that he is, he wears a plastic mask over his face to cover his identity, and so the Mandarin is humiliated in front of the whole world. Later on, during the 60s, the Mandarin would form his own subgroup of the Masters of Evil, consisting of most of the main baddies, such as the Swordsman, the Living Laser, the Enchantress, the Executioner, Power Man, the basic bunch. As well as later on, he would also want to control the Hulk, like everybody does. Those are pretty much the Mandarin's origins in a nutshell. Now I'm gonna be going into all the various interesting parts of the Mandarin's entire comic book tenure. Later on, the Mandarin would go on to develop even more complex schemes to try to destroy Iron Man. One of which includes actually establishing a false identity in China as a wealthy businessman named Zhang Tong, who pretty much controlled all the businesses in China, and even going as far as to refuse any establishment from Stark Industries. Eventually, the Mandarin, under the disguise of Zhang Tong, would hire the Hand, and he would later even kidnap the X-Man Psylocke and brainwash her into becoming his perfect assassin. This plan didn't go too well, and so later on in the comics, the Mandarin would actually figure out that one of his 10 rings was in fact a fake, and that he found out that an old Chinese wizard living in California actually possessed the real ring. So the Mandarin decided to give the fake ring that he believed to him. But when this happens, the Mandarin starts to lose several of his memories, in seeing that once any of the rings he was removed from his hand, and it turns out that the rings were in fact linked to his consciousness, and so that's the reason why he became so amnesiac. He became filled with amnesia. Eventually, the Mandarin travels to the Valley of Dragons, and he awakens the long-awaited arrival of the dragon Fin Fang Foom. And on top of Fin Fang Foom appearing, 8 other alien dragons would appear to wreak havoc across China. Even though Fin Fang Foom was the only dragon that the Mandarin had any control over. It was then revealed that the dragons are members of an alien race, and they're in fact from a planet called Kikaranathra, which is in the same star system orbiting around the sun, known as Maklu 4. And since the Mandarin stole the 10 rings of power from one of their warships, they wanted the rings back, and of course the Mandarin, being the villain that he is, refuses them. Eventually the Mandarin, along with the help of Iron Man, is able to destroy all these dragons. After the battle with the dragons, the Mandarin ended up in a coma with one of his hands missing. However, the missing hand grew back, and it took on the features of a reptilian hand. Later on, the Mandarin would discover an alien gem known as the Heart of Darkness, which he would use to turn back time in China and revert it back to the days of feudalism, where the Mandarin used his power to pretty much become the new ruler of China. In this, he figured out out who Iron Man's secret identity was. And then after a few scuffles with Iron Man was able to infect the Mandarin with a techno-organic virus. However, before he would die, the Mandarin would use the 10 rings to transport his consciousness into the body of a janitor working at the Hong Kong branch of Stark Industries. And then the Mandarin in his reincarnated body would seek to build a flying, indestructible fortress that he would use to conquer the world. Eventually, this was thwarted by Iron Man. The fortress exploded and the Mandarin was supposedly killed. Later on, the Mandarin's son, Temujin, would want to seek revenge on Iron Man for killing his father. However, when Temujin comes to his senses and figures out that Iron Man was not responsible for his father's death, he forgives him and he forfeits the 10 rings. And that's really all I have to say about the Mandarin. Great villain. Hope he shows up in the